Chicago Council on Global Affairs. It is Friday, April 25th. Let's start with Ukraine this week. President Trump is running out of patience. Having promised to end the war in 24 hours, he now finds that saying so doesn't make it so. The war continues in all its intensity and brutality, as we saw with strikes on Kyiv just the other day. And peace doesn't seem to be any closer than when Trump entered office almost 100 days ago. Patience, of course, is the core of successful diplomacy, but Donald Trump doesn't have much patience. So he's threatening to walk away, leaving Ukraine and its European supporters to pick up the pieces. Then we'll turn to tension in South Asia, which reached a fever pitch this week after terrorists struck civilians in Indian-controlled Jammu Kashmir. The territory has been at the core of the dispute between India and Pakistan since the birth of both states in 1947. Delhi and Islamabad are exchanging all kinds of threats, including ending key treaties that have managed their relationship for the past 70 or so years. In the past, of course, the United States always played a critical role in trying to diffuse disputes. It's not clear, however, that anyone can do so now. And then finally, a full-blown meltdown in the Pentagon. That is how one senior communications official described the situation in the building headed by former Fox News commentator Pete Hegseth. Hegseth, of course, is responsible for overseeing the largest military and civilian bureaucracy in the world, but aides have been fired and reassigned. Leaks about unsecure communications are rampant, and the president blames the media for spreading fake news. So will the bleeding stop, or can it only be stopped if Pete Hegseth is no longer in charge? Here to make sense of this week's events are three reporters who are covering these stories. Carla Anne Robbins is senior fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations and formerly with the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. Ravi Agrawal is editor-in-chief of Foreign Policy and host of Foreign Policy Live podcast, and Steve Erlanger, chief diplomatic correspondent in Europe for the New York Times. Good morning, Ravi and Carla. Good afternoon, Steve. Wonderful to have you all back. What a week, but then every week is what a week. It's just the only good news is it keeps us in business of talking about what's happening in the world. Steve, Ukraine back in the news, a lot happening, a lot of statements. The president going public both through Truth Social and in these extraordinary press conferences he constantly does from the Oval Office, saying that we're getting close to a deal or not. It's hard to make sense of it all, but you do. Because that's what you do for a living. So help us understand where we are today, and where do you think this story is heading?
Well, we are with President Trump's pal and special envoy Steve Witkoff in Moscow talking to Vladimir Putin again, having looked into his soul, as George W. Bush once said, and found him a wonderful guy, as Trump does. He has prepared. I mean, of course, Witkoff is in charge of Ukraine and Russia and the Middle East and Gaza and Iran, and has never been a diplomat before. So I think you see some of the overworked. Even Superman would have trouble dealing with all that. Even Richard Holbrooke probably would. But we are in a negotiation, but it doesn't seem to be moving very far because Trump and his people really want to win. They really want something to point to. 100 days, we promised to do it, end the bloodshed. The problem is Vladimir Putin doesn't particularly want it to end because he's not satisfied. And the Ukrainians don't really want it to end, not on the terms that Witkoff has presented to them. So at least the Europeans are involved talking to the Ukrainians. There's been a sort of counteroffer, but they're a long way, I think, from a deal, because here now we're not even talking about a 30-day ceasefire. We're talking about negotiations for a permanent ceasefire and a settlement. And one gets the impression that Trump, just really wants Ukraine out of the way so he can normalize business relations with Russia. Diplomatic relations, okay. And obviously Putin, was quite willing to wait for Trump, and Trump seems to be handing him victory on a platter. But it's not quite enough for Putin, it seems. And we'll see where it goes from here. I think Putin, by attacking Kyiv so strongly the other night, sent a message both to Mr. Trump and to Ukraine that he's not done. Also, it's true that Russia hasn't fully taken back all of its territory yet. The Russians say they've done it 99.5%. But certainly Putin won't agree to a ceasefire until all Russian sovereign territory is in Russian hands, let alone Ukrainian sovereign territory. The big struggle, and one can go into the details, but Trump is willing to recognize de jure Russian annexation of Crimea. He says Ukraine doesn't have to recognize that. And of course, Ukraine's constitution forbids that recognition. But this is a break with American tradition ever since World War II, ever since the Helsinki Accords. In that sense, it's rather shocking because it would be the recognition of seizure of territory by force from another sovereign country whose borders we have recognized. And so that's what has people quite excited. I think reality is biting in Ukraine, that there be some kind of at least temporary territorial compromise. But, Ukraine has 900,000 people under arms. It's not about to collapse. The Europeans are prepared slowly, but they are prepared to help Ukraine keep going. So it's very hard to see this war ending very quickly.
Sorry. Steve, I think you described where we are today really well, and it does raise, Carla, I think this pretty fundamental question with the United States believing that the way you negotiate with Vladimir Putin is to give him more and more and more concessions. And every step has been one more concession, from no NATO membership to territorial compromise to now recognizing Crimea as Russian territory. The split between the U.S. and Russia on the one hand, and Ukraine and the Europeans on the other hand, seems to just get wider and wider and wider. And so play that out. What does that mean? We haven't really been in a situation, I guess, ever, but certainly not since 1945, that the United States has sided with Russia or the Soviet Union against Europe. And yet that's what seems to be happening.
I was thinking about this. I was thinking about the first Trump term, and when Jim Mattis was the Secretary of Defense, and he wrote a new national defense strategy, which is a pretty impressive document. And what he said was the United States had to shift its strategic focus from counterterrorism to great power competition, China and a revanchist Russia. We have new enemies. We have to spend our money differently. We have to train people differently. There are different threats in the world. And he was right. I mean, you have to give the first Trump administration credit for understanding that the world was a different place and there were different frightening things out there. The idea that we are somehow going to say NATO is no longer our force multiplier, our number one, ally to make us safe in the world, and that really the advantage is that somehow we're going to make great economic deals with a country that basically just exports oil, which we also do, that we are going to reorder our entire strategic, honestly and truly, Ivo, I certainly hope that they're rewriting a massive defense strategy, because it is incomprehensible to me, A, what we get out of this, and B, how we are going to reorder our entire security structure. This is a massive change beyond the fact that it is, as Steve said, immoral, destabilizing, goes against the UN Charter. You don't have to talk about Helsinki. It goes against the UN Charter. We're going to have to redo our entire security architecture. And for what?
Yeah, I guess, Ravi, that is a good question. For what? I was struck by Trump's statements yesterday that Crimea has been in Russian hands for a very long time. So it's just recognizing the reality. And I couldn't help but think, he's for the last 100 days talked about taking other territories, and maybe one way to justify what he wants to do with Greenland is to give Russia Crimea. And then the question is, what what does that world look like? How does that serve America's interest? How does Trump make that argument to himself or to the people who might be pushing back on him?
Yeah, I mean, there've been, by the way, we're almost at 100 days of Trump, by the way. So we're happy almost 100 days.
It feels like 1,000, I can tell you.
It does indeed. There've been a lot of theories so far about what could possibly explain the chaos in the White House and all the different policies that the Trump administration has proposed and put forward and implemented so far. And, just listening to all of you talk, one of the things that strikes me, when it comes to Putin, is if you look at why Trump is doing what he's doing, supporting autocrats around the world, hurting Democrats around the world, hurting America's strongest allies. If you add it all up, one could make the case that one of the things Trump is trying to do globally, or is doing in effect, is strengthening the forces of autocracy and weakening the forces of democracy globally. If you look at every single thing, it kind of points to that direction. And then the question needs to be asked, well, why? Why would you do this? And the only plausible answer there would be that Trump feels like in weakening the forces of democracy and strengthening the forces of autocracy, he is perpetuating his own term. He is making it harder for there to be a domestic and a global public resistance to Trump and to Trumpism. So making the rules-based order weaker, making it harder to implement the rule of law, not just in the United States, but anywhere, making it okay to invade someone else's territory. All of the things that were the foundations of the last 80 years of international relations, in weakening those things, it opens up the door for Trump to do other things he might seemingly want to do. Now, there are holes in this theory as well. But so far, it is troubling that so many of us have to turn to that as a potential framework to try and make sense of why Trump is doing the things he is doing. Lastly, I'll just say on Russia and Ukraine, and specifically on Putin, we shouldn't forget that Trump said that he would solve this on day one. We are now on day 95. We are seeing in real time how difficult it is to negotiate peace anywhere, but specifically in this instance, how difficult it is to deal with Vladimir Putin, how he constantly lies and reneges on his words. And it's almost as if Trump is getting a real-time learning experience, a tutorial on why it is that the rest of the world has struggled with Putin so much in so many different arenas around the world.
I think, Ravi, you make a lot of good points, Steve, and particularly on Ukraine, but also this larger autocracy versus democracy. Hadn't heard that since Biden, but I guess we're back on the other side. Steve, you wanted to jump in and
if you can also, if I can for a second.
Yeah, yes, go ahead.
I was just going to say
where you think this Ukraine story is going to be next week or the week after too.
Fine. I mean, I think what Ravi is describing is what's driving the Europeans crazy because, what was the US but the enforcer of the borders that came out of World War II, whether you like them or not. And the EU helps with that, and NATO helps with that. I mean, if you didn't have that, you'd still have arguments over Transnistria. Croatia has territorial claims. I mean, there's the idea of taking territory by force is what drives everybody nuts. And I'm not sure what Trump is learning from Putin. He still loves Putin. I mean, when you got a sense for supplying military and financial aid to Ukraine, since there's no talk in Washington of another supplemental, it just hasn't even started, right? But Europe can afford it. It's another 20 billion euros a year or so. And Ukraine's not about to collapse. So the hope is, where does it end? The hope is you get a kind of de facto line because the Ukrainians are now going to put in landmines and try to create a stop. And if they can do that, maybe we end up with a nice frozen conflict, which I think would be much better than capitulation.
Yeah, I think that's right. And just to plug one of your stories, I think it was yesterday, you quoted Radoslav Sikorski, the Polish foreign minister, saying that on this point that Trump keeps arguing that somehow there is this belief that Russia is winning this war and that therefore Ukraine has no cards. Russia has spent, according to Sikorski, what is it, $200 billion and lost close to 1 million people, casualties, in order to, in fact, hold, as you rightly said, less than 20% of the territory for the last 3 years.
So this has pain inside Russia too. No, I mean,
extraordinary. And
we also need to think about just what happens if this Russia implodes. We've been through this before, but I mean, it's not an inconceivable thought. Anyway, I will stop. We have other things.
I think that we have other things to discuss. The last point is something that no one is paying enough attention to, except the Ukrainians, who are trying desperately to make Russia small again, which is back to its old Muscovite place, which is one way they can resist as well. Ravi, let's turn to another conflict that's been there for a very long time, but it really exploded literally this week in horrendous violence that killed 27 civilians in Jammu and Kashmir, the Indian-controlled part of Kashmir. And a really rapid escalation of rhetoric, not yet of military movements, but of rhetoric on both sides between Pakistan and India. Bring us up to date about what happened and how do you think this will play out? I mentioned in the introduction the critical U.S. role to bring, to diffuse these things, and Steve Witkoff is busy, as Steve rightly said, and it's not clear there's anybody else who could do it.
Yeah, this connects actually quite nicely to what we were discussing about Ukraine as well, because there is an American role here that I'll get to maybe at the end of my comments here. So very quick brief on what has happened. So Kashmir is a beautiful, beautiful place, and it is known as the Switzerland of South Asia. And there's a lovely little town near Srinagar called Pahalgam. Tourism there has been surging in recent years. Last year, about 3 million people from the rest of India went to Kashmir, which is up about 3x from a decade ago. And on Tuesday, a group of militants, there were about 4 shooters, emerged in Pahalgam at a very busy tourist site and just started shooting. We are told that they started shooting mostly at men, avoiding women and children. And as you say, about 27 people were killed. This is the biggest attack on civilians in India in more than a decade. And so far, a group called the Resistance Front has claimed responsibility. They're not very well known. They announced their existence in 2019, and they're said to be an offshoot of Lashkar-e-Taiba. For those of you who've heard that name before, LET was behind the 2008 Mumbai attacks. India hasn't verified this claim of responsibility, but this group, the Resistance Front, they say that the reason why they conducted this attack was that this was a move against the outsiders, their words, the outsiders that have been settling in Kashmir since 2019, which is when India revoked the semi-autonomous nature of the state. Kashmir, of course, which was divided in 1947 when India and Pakistan became independent and became 2 countries. Much of Kashmir chose to be part of India. But of course, in the current day, there is an Indian-administered Kashmir and a Pakistani-administered Kashmir. India had given Indian-administered Kashmir special rights in terms of how to manage itself. Those rights were revoked by Modi in 2019, ostensibly to allow more travel in, but also to allow more Hindus to settle there, which is what this group is trying to protest. Now, here's why all of this is such a big deal. India says that 3 of the 4 shooters are Pakistani. We have not seen proof of this, but the reason why that is important is that that claim has set off a set of moves by New Delhi and a set of moves by Islamabad, which are pretty serious. So India immediately closed the land border. It asked Pakistanis who were in India to leave. Much more significantly, it suspended a major water sharing treaty, which was brokered by the World Bank in the 60s. And that was a treaty that allowed both countries to get water from the Indus River. That supplies about 90% of Pakistan's water. So India is now saying it's going to start withholding water from there, which Pakistan would see as an act of war, an act of water war. And Pakistan, on the other hand, has taken some moves now also to close the border, restrict trade, and lots else. This could escalate in a major way. I should remind everyone, both of these countries are nuclear powers. They've been to war several times. And this current moment is particularly tense because in India, the media, which is very nationalist, is generally pro-Modi, is baying for blood. They are asking for a massive retaliation against Pakistan without clear sort of lines that Pakistan is responsible for this. Pakistan, of course, denies it, but there is a long history of the ISI, which is the main secret service organization in Pakistan, of having backed separatist groups which often go into Kashmir and then attack civilians there. So there is history here, and Indians are not wrong to point to that history. 2019 is an important immediate flashpoint to look back to here, because back then, when there was a similar attack on a military site in India and 40 people were killed, that quickly turned into a massive skirmish between the two sides. There was an aerial dogfight. India attacked military installations in Pakistan as a retaliation. And I remember that very well because there were very few de-escalatory routes there. America was one potential country that could try get the two sides to de-escalate. In the end, what happened was that both sides claimed a media victory. In that India could say it shot down a Pakistani fighter jet. Turns out that wasn't true. As we reported at the time, there was an end user agreement which allowed us to call DOD and find out that no Pakistani fighter jets were shot down. India conveniently ignored that discourse. So messy situation, very few de-escalatory routes. America may not play the role it played 5 years ago in this particular situation. And I think for those of us who care about this not turning into all-out war, really we'll be hoping that India can find some way of claiming retaliation without it being too severe and without Pakistan feeling like it needs to escalate further.
That's brilliant, Ravi, to set up this really incredibly important story. Carla, when you ask national security officials for the last 10, 15, 20 years, what keeps you up at night? The real answer always gets back to this: a war between India and Pakistan, because since the 1970s, both have had, actually 1990s, I guess it was, India in 1970 and Pakistan in the 1990s, have had nuclear arsenals, and quite large ones, not just a bomb here or there, but quite large ones, tactical missile capabilities, etc. And neighbors that confront each other with nuclear weapons is the nightmare scenario that many of us have been worried about. How do you see this one being diffused? If there is, is there a likelihood of an American? Is Marco Rubio on his way? I noticed that J.D. Vance is actually in India. Is that part of a strategy of de-escalation, or are these guys just too busy to upset the global order in the way that you described earlier for them to pay attention to it?
There's a long history, but quite a long time ago, and Ravi knows infinitely more about this than I do, of the United States trying to find accommodations between these two countries. But the Indians in particular said hands off quite a long time ago. And so the United States stayed out of it, except in times of high tension. And I remember Rich Armitage, who just passed away, would occasionally, get called in and do this and do some sort of shuttle diplomacy to try to cool things out. Because yes, you're right, it is a thing. When you ask people, what do you consider the most likely border for a nuclear confrontation? It's between India and Pakistan. That term de-escalatory route, not having a de-escalatory route, there are two ways of looking at it. How conscious are the Indians and the Pakistanis of the threat? I think they've been highly conscious of it in the past. Certainly, in the big terrorist attacks, they've backed away from it. And the Indians in particular exercising great restraint. Modi seems much less restrained these days. He seems like a different Modi, but I defer to Ravi on this. Do they train on this? Does the military understand the potential threat of it? In reality, for Pakistan, there's no incentive to start a nuclear war there because they'd be destroyed in a minute. Let's face it. I mean, look how small they are by comparison. The question really is, do they study de-escalatory routes? In the past, they've shown a great deal of consciousness of the threat on both sides. Right now, the politics inside of India makes me very nervous. But once again, I defer to Ravi on this. I don't see the United States getting involved in it. I don't see anybody shuttling over there, but I defer.
Steve, how do you see it? Maybe this is Kaja Kallas's moment. The European Union actually had a very, very important visit to India a few weeks ago, and all commissioners, led by von der Leyen and Costa, went to India. There's a major focus on trying to get an Indian trade deal in order to offset the trade restrictions being imposed by the United States. This is a new era. Perhaps, or the Chinese are, of course, another player. They're much closer to the Pakistanis, and they're not probably seen in Delhi as impartial. But this is serious, and everybody knows it's serious.
Well, from your lips to Brussels' ears, I mean, I think this is a great opportunity for them to try, at least, to talk to both sides. I'm kind of curious. I mean, Trump loves the idea of Modi. He's another strongman type. So I do wonder, I mean, I'd like the Americans almost to stay out of it, but I do worry a bit that Trump's going to somehow intervene on one side of it. And that really could also be dangerous, I have to say. No, I worry about, I mean, so far, they've had battles, but they've contained themselves. And one hopes, I mean, I think they understand the risks, God knows. I mean, it's a long way from conventional to nuclear. But who's going to moderate, who's going to mediate? I really have no idea. I mean, at the moment, Washington seems so busy. The Defense Department, you'd think, might get involved, but I don't know what's happening with the Defense Department. And at the State Department, they've barely confirmed top people. So it's partly nobody's fault that these confirmations haven't been faster, but it does leave the U.S. administration particularly empty at the moment. I'm also rather hoping that somewhere in our intelligence services, there are smart people who are already talking to India and Pakistan, because I'm sure they have good relations with both sides, since ISI kind of runs Pakistan.
Yes, they have. That's for sure. I mean, Ravi, just back to you. I think Carla's question and sort of the big question overall is, what are the forces within Indian society that could, in fact, persuade Modi that escalation is too risky, as happened in 2008 when the Indian restraint was extraordinary in a much bigger attack in Mumbai, which killed 175 people. What forces exist within Indian society today, in contrast to those in 2008?
Excuse me. I was there in 2008 when the Mumbai attacks took place. India in 2025 is very different from what it was in 2008. That was a different government, a different people, a different media environment, a different sense of self as well. India was a very different country. It also saw back then Pakistan as its primary sort of adversary. Today, it's very different. Indians see China as its primary adversary. Pakistan is mostly an afterthought. I think one framework through which to look at this is not just the casualties, not just the fact that this is a massive attack in historic context for India, but Modi is going to be particularly upset because in a domestic sense, he had staked a fair bit of his reputation on the 2019 conversion of Kashmir from a semi-autonomous state to one that is under New Delhi's rule more directly. He had said that this was going to be a success. It would lead to a lot of foreign investment. Tourists would flock there. This jeopardizes that. And so Modi is going to be much more upset about this attack than he would have otherwise been. I think there's a public blowback from this that is going to be sharp, intense, that will lead to tougher measures than we would have imagined. Hence the Indus River diversion, hence tougher moves that are being discussed and debated in the next few days, including potential military strikes on Pakistani military installations, so-called terrorist organizations there. This will be intense. And again, I think the main de-escalatory sort of route is for Modi to claim victory. A lot of the Indian public opinion runs through the imagery and scenes on TV. If you think Trump's is a reality TV presidency, a lot of India runs on what is seen through the media. And so the media is obsessed with this story. There are already anchors gaming out what kind of military response there will be. So I will look to them for a declaration of victory in the next 5 or 6 days as the first sign that this could de-escalate. I don't think India is going to look to the West at all. It's a very different country, much more self-confident than it was before. Also very aware of how the global order itself has shifted.
Can I ask Ravi a question, which is there communication between the Indian military and the Pakistani military that says, we got to do this, but it actually is limited. We're going to keep it conventional, suck it up. It's not going to go any further than this. So even as they're doing this performative response, that they're actually trying to keep it down to a dull roar?
So when I was based there, and this is now many years ago, there were military-to-military communications. They have significantly declined in recent years. There has not been a Pakistani ambassador in India for several years now. They have whittled down the size of their outposts significantly. So communications are worse than they have been in many years. And that doesn't bode well for any of this.
No, communications are critical, but shifting over in a really forced attempt to go to the next to our next and final subject, Carla, communications are at the heart of at least the public part of the scandal besetting the Defense Department. Signal checks and chats and having unclassified computers in your in secure communication facilities in the Pentagon, etc. But there's something deeper going on. It seems to me there's this argument that Pete Hegseth thinks he's at war with the building, as the building is called, and this is really an attempt to find way to control the military and the civilian bureaucracy within the Pentagon. So, help us understand what's going on. Clearly, when when you are on the front page of the newspaper with breaking stories every day, as Pete Hegseth is, it might not be strange that you get a little paranoid about what's happening with the people around you.
It's not just that he's at war with the building's at war with him. And he came in, I think he thought he was going to be liberating, the War on Warriors. That was his book in 2024. He came in, he thought he was liberating the military from these terrible, terrible constraints, the restraints of DEI, the restraints of the JAGs, the people who were tying their hands, who lost Afghanistan and Iraq. This was the things that Trump said about diversity and wokeism, the things that people on the Hill were saying about this. This was really, this was the thing that he was obsessed with and that he continues to be obsessed with. And he came in, and it is really, when you consider what is going on in the world and all of the threats we've been talking about, his concerns are so small bore, but they are so, at the same time, so threatening to the core of an apolitical military. He has fired 9, 10 admirals and generals, women, people of color, because they're allegedly so woke, politicizing the military, all of these things. It is, if he survives, it will be because it was so hard to get him through. And every time it looks like he's going to survive, there is another incredible leak. And the reason why there's another incredible leak is because he's not just at war with the building is at war with him. And the White House, Caroline Leavitt, the spokesperson for the White House, said the most incredible defense for him the other day is that this is what happens when everyone's against you, as if that somehow was a great thing. He has no management experience. He came from Fox News. This is an enormous, enormous bureaucracy. And I mentioned Jim Mattis before and this national defense strategy. There is no sense that they have a strategic vision, all the things that need to be fixed. There's an enormous need to reform the military, enormous need. If President Trump really is going to redefine the United States' role in the world, the question that you asked before, Ivo, if we're really switching sides here, we're going to have to really redefine how we're fighting wars. All of these big questions here. And I'm looking here, I'm sort of vamping here for a minute because I'm looking for this extraordinary quote that he had. He went to the Army War College and he was very, very defensive yesterday. And he went to the Army War College and he said, this is what he defined basically why he was there. No more social engineering, no more climate change worship, no more electric tanks, no more gender confusion, no more pronouns, no more excuses, no more quotas, no more woke. Can I say this? I can say it. No more woke bullshit that undermines commanders and command climates. We are laser focused on our mission of war fighting. I don't think that's what the strategic demands of the world needs right now. And interestingly enough, the building doesn't see it either.
So that Steve, does raise a fundamental question, because I think Carla rightly sort of lays out the problem, which is that clearly the war was started by Hegseth, but the building is reacting. The building is an apolitical instrument of the U.S. government. Pete Hegseth is the chosen head of this building by the elected president of the United States, who has been confirmed by the U.S. Senate. Yes, 50-50 vote, and Vance had to break the tie, but that's how our system works. And there is a question of, shouldn't the building be deferring to the representative of the elected president of the United States, who, by the way, is also commander-in-chief under our Constitution? And isn't there some justice on the part of the White House to say, you guys, you may not like it, but just suck it up or leave?
Well, I can't speak for the building. The building's mute. I do know, talking to European officials who try to talk to the Pentagon, they say officials are terrified of being fired for saying anything, let alone the wrong thing. So it's created an atmosphere of fear that I don't think is conducive to good working. I mean, ideally, when you're discussing policy, you can argue with one another, you can have debates, and if those debates leak, that's Washington. But That's not what's happening here. And the problem starts, with the choice of Hegseth. I mean, if you remember, Jane Mayer wrote this extraordinary piece in the New Yorker, which filled out a lot of other reporting about kind of what a jerk Pete Hegseth was. I mean, maybe he's now a saint, but I mean, lots of allegations of mistreating women and affairs and drinking and incompetence in leading even small organizations. Very good on TV. He has beautiful hair. He apparently has opened a makeup studio.
I think we all have
inside
much
the
better
Pentagon.
hair than he does. I just
Well, he wears his little American flag handkerchief. And he's on TV a lot, and he's exercising with the troops. I mean, he's a guy, I guess he was a major, but, that's all he was. And majors aren't supposed to think about strategy. They're supposed to follow orders, and they're supposed to be at the hard end. And it's great. You want an army and a military that's at the hard end, but you want people on top who are thinking about how not to fight wars and how to deter war fighting and how to actually carry out the commander-in-chief's desires with as little disruption as possible. And so far on that scale, I think he's failed. And I think the Trump White House would have gotten rid of him ages ago, except they don't. It's too embarrassing having pushed so hard for him. But, I wouldn't compare his life to a lettuce, but I think, in the next month or so, he's likely to be gone for whatever reason.
Ravi, you think this bleeding, which it is on the front pages of the papers and in the broadcast studios, it will inevitably lead to his demise, or do you think these guys are just going to push through and if so, with what consequence?
Well, it's a game of chicken, isn't it? Stephen's point reminded me of the great Liz Truss lettuce head, and I'm surprised someone hasn't done that yet for Hegseth. Look, I mean, beyond the if this wasn't as serious, it would be funny, right? This is, I think, a moment for any American adversary, whether it's a country or a terrorist group, to look at this dysfunction playing out in the newspapers, on TV, to look at it and redouble their plans, whatever those plans may be. Whether it is the knowledge that you can access their phone numbers publicly, you can bet on the fact that they have been using their personal devices to have classified conversations. You just know that this is an easier group of people to crack, perhaps than at any time in American history. And that this group is a group that is less prepared, less cohesive, less united, less staffed, with more cuts to come, by the way, than any other Pentagon in living memory. And so that is what worries me the most about this, as we are focused on the dysfunction and the will he get sacked, won't he get sacked debate. The Pentagon is leaking good people. It is bereft of clear leadership. It is covering its tracks. And with all of this reporting on it, knowing what we know of President Trump, he is sort of less likely to want to fire him, because we know he doesn't want to give the media a win, because he sees the media as an enemy. And I hope, if he were listening to this, that those of us who are commentators or writers, our aim here is not to mock. Our aim is to say this is a moment that adversaries could take advantage of. And that is not a good thing for anyone, certainly not for the United States or the White House. So that is what I hope they focus on, rather than the idea of giving a win to someone. This is a loss for America.
A loss for America, I think, is part of what's happening all over the place in these 95 days. It's not clear to any of us how this is making America more powerful, more influential, more secure, more prosperous, or indeed great again. But that's part of the reason we come back together every week in order to discuss these kinds of issues and to find find the reasons and the challenges behind the headlines. Always a great pleasure to do so with the three of you: Carla Robbins of the Council on Foreign Relations, Steve Erlanger of the New York Times, Ravi Agrawal of Foreign Policy Magazine, and with all of you who are tuning in to watch or listen. We thank you for being part of the show. We'll be back next week with another edition of World Review. Until then, have a great weekend.